Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and we're joined here tonight in the studio to shed more light on Egypt-Africa relations. We're joined by Dr. Cherif Amir, the geopolitical expert and international affairs analyst. Dr. Amir, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Dr. Amir, before we start off, talking about the little details that are taking place and the developments taking place within the African continent, how would you assess so far it's been a few years now that Egypt has been working on strengthening and deepening its relations with the African states, really taking the Egyptian-African relations from one side of the spectrum to another. So how would you assess the work that's being done, namely since starting 2019 being chair of the African Union up until now?
Well, Egypt went through a lot during this period of, let's say, the past 30 years. We abandoned totally the file of Africa. And then in 2011, when the Arab Spring took place and all the uprisings and all the instability, we lost our weight. And then in 2013, when Egypt, the people of Egypt chose the democratic path, and President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi became president, democratically elected by the people at that time. The African Union, unfortunately, was under the impression that this was not a democratic path. Why they had this impression? Because this was the heritage of abandoning Africa for many years. No one in our diplomacy were speaking to them. So President Sisi at that time decided that we have to take things by our own hands, and he went to Algeria, he went to Niger, and at that time, let's say, before we were chairing the head of the African Union, we were banned from the African Union itself.
Yes.
And our membership was frozen. So President Sisi started a new whole policy of talking to our, he called them rightfully, our brothers in Africa, that we have to talk with them, we have to exchange, we have to explain Egypt's position, why we are heading towards this path. And then we achieved what you just mentioned. We became president of the African Union in 2019. And at that time, it was the first time in Egypt's or in Africa's history that there is a president, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who laid a plan of development for the African nations. Unfortunately, all the time it was rotation presidency, and just inaugurating conferences, and nothing happens. At that time, President Sisi said we have to have an economic relation with other, all the countries. We have to find solutions for several conflicts. And Egypt worked on that. In South Sudan, we worked on the stability of Libya. We worked also about Sudan itself, North Sudan, how to achieve peace and democracy there. So it was a long, long path of Egyptian diplomacy. We are proud of it because it took us a long road, but we are happy that now there is this kind of cooperation between several countries.
Yes, definitely. Well, recently, Egypt and President Sisi participated in the Russia-Africa Summit, which took place in St. Petersburg. It's the second edition of this summit. Now, obviously, Russia has been embroiled for over a year now in its own conflict with Ukraine that resulted in a big energy and grain and food crises for the African continent and the rest of the world as well. So it is quite significant that a lot of African leaders, alongside with President Sisi, he was there as, in his capacity as chair of the NIPAD, which is the developmental arm of the African Union. What would you say is the main significance of the African leaders meeting with the Russian President Vladimir Putin in St. Petersburg? And what would you say were the main outcomes or results from such a conference?
What took place in St. Petersburg is a turning point in the geopolitical map in the world. Now we have seen with our own eyes Africa shifting from the Western influence to Russia. And maybe many years ago, it would have been seen, as you said, the second edition. At that time, there was no this war of Ukraine, the special military operation in Donbass. So it could have been seen as normal cooperations between Russia and Africa. Today, it's not that. We won't see it like that. Today, the West is very sees that as a critical point. France is losing many of its ancient colonies there. So today that the African leaders and President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi is going by himself there to represent Egypt as a power and also the NEPAD, it's a sign that Africa is not willing to listen anymore to what the Western world dictates. We want multipolar system. We are working on it. We all know that in the BRICS, South Africa is part of it. And many African nations want to be part of the BRICS, especially Egypt and Algeria. So what happened is that there is a shaping of the map of the world. Russia controls now the grains, controls the prices of the oil, the energy, and controls the ports where the grains come and go, the exportation, I mean, and also the weapons. It's the Russian weaponry is a high tech now. We have seen in the battlefield now how the Western arm productions failed in front of the Russian arms. So I think that the African leaders are saying we are sovereign. We have to work by our own means to listen to Russia. We need the grains. The grains, the problem that happened before is that we all know, and Turkey was part of it, that the grains were sold in parts of Europe, Western Europe, and not given to the African nations. That's why President Putin stressed that it will be given freely to the peoples of Africa. And Egypt, he wishes that Egypt becomes a hub of this exportation. So I think that today Africa gave a clear message to the whole world that there is a new generation of sovereign leaders. They take their own decisions, whether they like it or not in Europe, but it's time to shift powers. And I think that the Russian leadership was very smart in dealing with this issue by offering free grains and energy also.
Yes. Well, whether the international community or the Europeans or the United States likes it or not, I mean, whether they like it or not, it will probably have some sort of an effect on the relation between the African states and Egypt, along with NATO member countries, the European continent, the US, a major superpower. I mean, it will affect the African continent economically, at least through the grain exports of the Black Sea, but also it will have some sort of a political effect. Or will it not have as a serious effect as we imagine, because still maybe the international community has its own interests within the African continent? I mean, still, the African continent is a major source of raw materials and natural resources. Do you think this change of the power balance, do you think it could negatively affect Africa?
Some leaders will pay price because of the following to the West. They were not prepared for this shift. I watched many of them. You could read it in their eyes. They're not. They're happy to be at St. Petersburg, but something is going on in their mind. They know that when they will go back to their countries, many negative things will happen, especially from the United States and Europe. It will be, yes, their economy, their political situation, their security will be affected. So yes, we all know that it was always like that with the West. There is this blackmail. If you go out, you go astray from the way that we have decided that you should follow you pay the price immediately. So I think that this visit for several African leaders, there will be a price. And that's why I said it was a bold and sovereign decision to go, because they, as political leaders, they know by experience what could happen to their nations. But still, they have to take this opportunity, because inside Africa, the West is losing, and China and Russia are present. So they were between two options, whether to wait the defeat of the West inside Africa, and then the Russians will come and tell them, okay, goodbye, there is another generation of leaders pro-Russians who would come and rule, or they could just take advantage of the opportunity and go to St. Petersburg and say, we have shifted our positions. I have seen that mainly all of them decided to take this one position. And I think that especially countries like Egypt and Algeria, fortunately, we had previous relations with Russia, so we ensured that we have a force that is backing us militarily, economically, and on the investment projects. So yes, there will be negative effects, but let's not forget, and maybe we'll get to this point later, that Russia is present through Wagner, the paramilitary group, through its the population standing by Russia, because the Russians and the Chinese are making projects inside Africa. They're not using the raw materials as the West did, to take the raw materials and leave them in poverty. No, they just help the population, the local population, to work and find jobs inside of their own country.
Yes. Dr. Amir, you've mentioned the BRICS group, and Egypt aims to be a member of the BRICS alongside with Algeria. And really its relations with the rest of the African countries and Russia as well really helps boost the Egyptian candidacy. Now, BRICS is like the fast-growing developing nations, and it promises to change Egypt's status economically and politically as well. What sort of effect do you think Egypt will benefit from or enjoy by joining BRICS, and how soon can that happen?
Well, the advantage is huge, of course, because we all know that they're intending to have one currency. This is one of the things. Yesterday, Russia shifted to the digital currency, ruble currency, like the Bitcoin. So the BRICS is going through this path also. I think that the sooner we will join them, the sooner we will ensure that we have economic stability. There is several obstacles, of course. First of all, there is lots of candidates. It's not only Egypt and Algeria and Africa. In the Middle East, there is also Turkey. We heard also that several Gulf states wish to be observants also. So I think that we have lots, and Iran also is trying to join. So there is numerous candidates. Is it soon? I don't think it will be that soon until the situation, the global situation would be calm. I think the Russians do not want to rush to attract all of them now. They are happy for the list of the candidacy, but they are saying that we have to ensure who are our friends and who are not our friends inside the BRICS. For example, you have Brazil is member of the BRICS, but at the same time it has some positions between Da Silva and Belarus that changes towards Russia. Same thing for India. Look, for example, the meeting of the BRICS in South Africa in the coming weeks. President Putin would not attend because South Africa has signed the court, the criminal court, international criminal court. They signed the accords. So I think they want to adjust many things to ensure that whoever joins the BRICS is a 100% ally of Russia and China. And these are the main powers. And the other obstacle, you have to be a contributor. You cannot go in there to ask for money and that's it. All the nations, Brazil, India, South Africa, Russia, and China, they are all industrial nations, powerful nations, heavyweight nations in all these aspects. So there is this ideology that everyone is contributing. They're not asking countries to come and ask for loans.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, talking about contribution, Egypt's trade, the trade exchange with the rest of the African continent has amounted to $117 billion for the first quarter of 2023. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
The volume of trade exchange between Egypt and African countries has amounted to $2.117 billion during the first quarter of 2023. Top 5 markets for exports to Africa were Libya, Sudan, Algeria, Morocco and Tunisia, with values of $317 million, $226 million, $217 million, $191 million and $86 million respectively. Construction material were Egypt's main exports to African markets with a value of $422 million, followed by chemicals and fertilizers at $358 million and foodstuffs at $242 million. Other exports included electronic and engineering goods, ready-made garments, paper packaging and upholstery, medical products, crops, textiles and furniture. This aligns with Egypt's goals to enhance trade relations with Africa and overcome any obstacles that may impede trade between countries. Egypt is a signatory to several trade agreements amongst African nations, including the African Continental Free Trade Area and the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa. Since 2000, half of the world's fastest growing economies have been in Africa. 21 out of 30 of the world's fastest growing cities are now in Africa.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, continuing our discussion with Dr. Amir. Now, sir, there are huge developments taking place in Africa now, especially in Niger. The presidential guards overthrew the president, Mohamed Bazoum. Obviously, France said, well, we want him back. We're going to protect our citizens, our interests. Nigeria joined France as well. So the head of the military there is anticipating any sort of military action. Nigeria said you have a week to reinstate Bazoum back in power. And we're seeing these developments taking place today, supporting other countries, supporting Niger. How is such a conflict and this quick escalation that's taking place there will affect the neighboring African states as well, and the relationship with a major power such as France?
Well, what is said in the mainstream media, it's a coup. What we have seen in the pictures lately in the news, the people were in the street hailing the military for its action. I think that many nations have the right to call their army to help them to go through another path. We have done that in 2013 in Egypt. We asked as people, our military, to help us, and they came to our help. So it could be the scenario. So I'm putting all scenarios in front of us. It doesn't have to be a coup. We know that the Western media usually like to portray any action that is not towards their interests as a coup. The second thing is that we all know that Niger is the main provider of uranium to France. It's the hub of uranium. And that's why there is all this crisis. And the fact that the ex-president, Mohamed Bazoum, was pro-Western, pro-France, to the extent that French military were present everywhere there. It was something very provocative maybe for the people of the Niger, because they live in poverty and they know that this exportation of uranium costs tremendous amounts of money. The third point also, the presence of the Russians. We all know that the Wagner group, they are present there, the paramilitary group is present there. They helped Central Africa, the country, to also to see the military to seize power. They helped also the Malian army to get rid of all the French presence. Even the French language is not the official language anymore. And then there is also this instability, as you said, about the region and as a whole, because it's not only a country that the head of the country is replaced by the army. No, it's the uranium. This is the key word, the uranium. And the uranium is used for nuclear weapons. And this is the only provider of uranium for the French. So what we are witnessing now is a huge confrontation between Russia and France on the grounds of uranium. It's like Russia telling France, well, you won't have any more uranium for your nuclear weapons. Goodbye. And now it will be an open confrontation. Nigeria tried to, and France also, try to intervene. They're sieging now the French embassy, the people of Niger, and they have the flags of Russia. They're chanting and claiming President Vladimir Putin's name everywhere. And yesterday night, there was a declaration on the Malian TV of Mali, saying that they have an alliance with Central Africa, the country, and they're declaring that they support the action of the military institution inside Niger. And the first and the fourth point, they repeated it 3 times live on air, and I think that the Russians are just beside them, that they said any attack, military attack against the military of Niger, it will be a declaration of war against Mali and Central Africa. Of course, we all know it means Wagner everywhere. It means the Russians everywhere. And it means also the Chinese with their investment present in this area also. So I think that things are getting very, very critical. I don't think that the African nations would go into such a journey, such an adventure. The French, even President Emmanuel Macron said, well, we want only that they do not approach or hurt or harm the security of the French citizens there. He didn't ask for anything further because he doesn't want to go to another military adventure there. It will be devastating. He saw what happened in Mali. The French were attacked several times and they had to leave at the end.
Well, this is not the only conflict that's taking place in Africa involving the military, also the conflict in Sudan between the National Army and the Rapid Support Forces. And Egypt also recently was part of the Neighbors of Sudan summit, trying to find a diplomatic and a peaceful way to end the solution. However, this conflict erupted in April, and it's now, I mean, the months we keep counting months, and it doesn't seem that we are reaching any place that is will result in a peaceful resolution, a diplomatic compromise, or anything of the sort. And Sudan is our southern neighbor, direct southern neighbor. So how does Egypt deal with such a very close and critical conflict that is taking place on our southern borders? And how can we actually try and coordinate the rest of the African Sudan's neighbors, have some sort of control or a compromise, a safe, peaceful deal to taking place there?
The main problem is the external interference. That's the problem of Sudan. You have several nations inside this small conflict between the Rapid Reaction Force and the army. You have Saudi Arabia, you have the Emirates, you have Eritrea, you have Kenya, you have Ethiopia, and also the West, who just decided at the first day that they have to evacuate all their staff and all their citizens there, anticipating a large-scale war, which has happened. And we have our own interests also as Egypt. And there is also South Sudan, and Libya, and Chad. So you have all these countries and two factions. And let me tell you, it's not only two factions, but because you have in Darfur, it's like semi-autonomous part, which is not Arab. So they are trying to have their national defense force. And it could be like South Sudan. So we as Egypt, we have double problem in that. The first one is the refugees. The refugees, we have to take care of them. We have to open our borders to them.
Yes.
And then lots of them stayed in southern Egypt. So you have a population, a foreign population in southern Egypt.
Yes.
There is question marks. Is it geopolitically and in the security, internal security, is it something that calls for, is alarming, for example, or not? I think maybe, yes. The second point is also the infiltration inside the refugees. You never know who's getting into your own country. Smugglers, terrorists, we don't know who are these people. You have to open the border and take them all. Especially that Egypt does not work as a country that hosts the refugees in camps. We don't have camps. We have, they go and mingle with everyone. They live with the population. So this is the problem. The second problem, also the security of Sudan. He said, it's our southern border. It's our backyard also. We had a huge history with them. And it was a card that we played against Ethiopia at a certain time, that if you harm the security of water, we have our presence there. Now, you cannot ensure that anymore because the country is in war, in devastating war. So we're trying to gain our position again. And there is a huge problem also that our allies are the Emirates, and they're supporting a faction, and our allies also Saudi Arabia, and they're supporting another faction. And you're between both of them, and you have your own interest. And then suddenly we saw that Marshal Khalifa Haftar in Libya decided to take sides today in the morning like that, and he shipped weapons to the Rapid Reaction Force. Chad did the same thing. Eritrea is siding with the army, the national army of Sudan, and then Ethiopia sided with the Rapid Reaction Force, and Kenya is in the middle also. We have to find a solution for that. So what Egypt has done is very smart. We gathered all the factions. We told them, find a solution for the refugees first, because the civilians are paying the price. And second, we have to find a solution of the partition of powers.
Well, you've also mentioned Ethiopia being part of the equation, which has always been part of the equation, especially for the Renaissance Dam. Egypt, Sudan and Ethiopia, and on the trails of the Neighbors of Sudan summit, Egypt and Ethiopia vowed that within 3 to 4 months they will be able to find a good agreement satisfactory for both sides, Egypt and Ethiopia, regarding the dam, which which has been an issue for over a decade now. So how come all of a sudden Egypt and Ethiopia said that they would find an agreement for the Ethiopian dam? Is it partly affected by the conflict and situation in Sudan, or is there some sort of another deal that will be cut between Egypt and Ethiopia?
I think after all these years, the trust between Egypt and the government of Ethiopia has been very shaky. They gave so many promises. Abiy Ahmed came to Egypt, President Sisi went to Ethiopia. He came here and he gave a promise in front of all the press that they would respect Egypt's water rights, and then they didn't fulfill their promise. I think that fortunately President Sisi understands very well the mentality of the government there. He knows the maneuvers, he knows what's taking place. That's why we see them always open to discussion with Abiy Ahmed. And this, I think it will take time. We have to be sure that Ethiopia would not harm, literally harm our water portion. And this would take us, whatever it will cost us. We'll do everything to ensure our veins, this is our veins of life.
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, obviously, as we've discussed tonight with Dr. Amir, a lot of developments taking place within the African continent, a lot of efforts as well by Egypt in terms of spearheading the efforts and the responsibilities of the African continent. But still, a lot more needs to be done and a lot more to be followed here on Nile International. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, I'd like to thank my distinguished guest, Dr. Cherif Amir, the geopolitical affairs expert and international relations analyst. Dr. Amir, thank you very much for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Nile International. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for joining us.